At first, it appeared to be a dispute over a single piece of jewelry. But behind the polished walls of St. James's Palace, the alleged confrontation carried a far heavier meaning: the memory of Diana, Princess of Wales, the position of Queen Camilla, and the emotional burden Prince William had spent decades learning to conceal. The circulating account centers on Charles Spencer, 9th Earl Spencer, who is alleged to have arrived unexpectedly at a private palace reception and confronted Queen Camilla over a diamond and sapphire brooch associated with Diana's family history. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed that this confrontation occurred, and no independently authenticated record of the exchange has been supplied. The details must therefore be treated as reported claims rather than established fact. Yet the story has drawn attention because the disputed object was said to represent far more than royal decoration. Jewelry within the British royal family often carries several identities at once. A brooch may be a personal gift, a family heirloom, a historical artifact, and a public symbol, depending on who owns it, who wears it, and what memories the public attaches to it. When that piece is connected to Diana, however, every appearance becomes emotionally charged. According to the account, the brooch had links to the Spencer family and had once been associated with Diana's life following her marriage to the future King Charles III. The transcript claims Earl Spencer regarded its alleged appearance on Camilla not simply as an error of wardrobe selection, but as an intrusion into a part of his sister's legacy that he believed should remain protected. That claim remains unverified. No confirmed documentation establishing the ownership, provenance, or legal restrictions surrounding the alleged brooch has been provided here. Nevertheless, the emotional conflict described is easy to understand. To the palace, such an item might be viewed through inventories, trusts, and collection records. To Diana's brother, it could represent something more intimate, a surviving link to a sister whose image has remained contested long after her death. Was this truly a disagreement about property, or was the jeweler merely the visible object through which decades of unresolved grief finally emerged? The reported setting makes the allegation even more sensitive. St. James's Palace is a place of ceremony, diplomacy, and carefully managed royal presentation. Private receptions depend upon restraint. Guests are expected to observe protocol, staff are trained to prevent disruption, and disagreements are normally removed from public view before they become part of the evening itself. The reference narrative claims Earl Spencer ignored those conventions, approached Camilla directly, and demanded an explanation in front of those present. It further suggests King Charles attempted to move the discussion into a private room. None of these details has been publicly verified, but if such a scene occurred, it would have broken one of the monarchy's most important unwritten rules. Family conflict must never overpower the official purpose of a royal occasion. For Charles, the alleged moment would have created an immediate conflict of loyalties. As king, he would be responsible for preserving dignity and order within the palace. As Camilla's husband, he would naturally wish to shield her from public humiliation. Yet as Diana's former husband and the father of her children, he would also understand why anything connected to her possessions could carry extraordinary emotional weight. But the most difficult position would belong to Prince William, the Prince of Wales. William's public role demands composure. He is expected to stand above the painful history of his parents' marriage while maintaining a functional relationship with his father and stepmother. He must honor Diana's memory without allowing every modern royal decision to be interpreted as a continuation of the conflicts that shaped his childhood. That balance has always been fragile. The alleged confrontation would have brought the different parts of his life into the same room without warning. On one side stood his uncle, a powerful guardian of the Spencer family's memory, and a man whose public words after Diana's death became part of royal history. On the other stood Camilla, the queen, whose place beside Charles represents the present reality of the monarchy. Between them stood William, no longer only Diana's grieving son, but the future king expected to protect the stability of the crown. The transcript claims that the emotional pressure became overwhelming and that William withdrew from the reception in visible distress. There is no public confirmation that he broke down in tears, and such a private emotional reaction cannot responsibly be presented as fact. Still, the account raises a question that goes beyond the accuracy of one dramatic scene. What happens when a person expected to embody national stability is suddenly forced to confront the most painful history of his own family? For nearly 3 decades, William has built a public identity around control, responsibility, and continuity. His grief has usually appeared through measured speeches, carefully chosen tributes, and the causes he supports. Rarely has the public been given access to the private cost of carrying Diana's legacy while serving within the institution that became inseparable from her suffering. That is why the alleged image of William leaving the room has such emotional force. It suggests that the future monarch's calm exterior may depend upon keeping separate worlds from colliding. His love for his mother, his duty to his father, his acceptance of Camilla's official position, and his responsibility to prevent old wounds from destabilizing the future. The jewelry dispute, if genuine, would have destroyed that separation in an instant. Another unanswered question concerns how Earl Spencer supposedly learned about the reception and the brooch. The transcript alleges that his name was not included on the official guest list, raising the possibility that someone inside the royal system provided information. That suggestion is also unconfirmed, but it introduces a hidden institutional tension. If a palace employee deliberately alerted the Spencer family, the confrontation may not have been spontaneous. Someone may have believed the alleged use of the brooch required intervention, or may have wanted the dispute to become impossible for the royal household to ignore. But who would benefit from creating such a collision? The answer matters because internal leaks transform personal disagreements into questions of trust and security. A royal household cannot function if private schedules, clothing selections, or guest arrangements are passed to outside figures seeking confrontation. At the same time, employees may feel compelled to speak when they believe important historical or legal boundaries are being overlooked. This is where the story begins to move beyond jewelry and grief. It becomes a conflict over who controls Diana's legacy, who has the authority to use objects connected to her life, and whether William can remain neutral when his mother's family and his father's household stand on opposing sides. Because the most consequential development was not the alleged confrontation itself. It was what William was reportedly asked to do afterward, and why his response may have opened a far deeper division between the future king and the court he is preparing to inherit. The reported request placed William in an almost impossible position. According to the circulating account, he was urged to return to the reception and stand beside Charles and Camilla before the remaining guests departed, creating a visible image of unity after the confrontation. Buckingham Palace has not confirmed that such a message was sent, and no authenticated note has been made public. Even so, the choice described in the story reveals why the evening may have become far more consequential than a disagreement over a brooch. Returning would have reassured diplomats, courtiers, and palace staff that the senior royal family remained aligned. It would also have allowed the king's household to present Earl Spencer's intervention as an isolated breach of protocol rather than evidence of a deeper division. But for William, standing beside Camilla while questions remained about an object linked to Diana might have appeared to dismiss the concern before its legal and emotional significance had been examined. Was unity being requested for the protection of the crown, or was the future king being asked to endorse a version of events he did not yet accept? The transcript claims William refused to participate in what he regarded as a staged display of harmony. That remains unverified and should not be treated as a confirmed act of defiance. Yet if such a refusal occurred, it would mark an important shift between the office of the Prince of Wales and the king's central household. William would be asserting that royal presentation could not come before clarity. That distinction matters because the monarchy has long relied on visual continuity. A shared appearance can quiet speculation without anyone answering the questions beneath it. But the strategy becomes risky when the public suspects that the image is concealing a genuine dispute. The alleged jewelry issue made that risk particularly acute. According to the account, palace staff later examined whether outdated records or incomplete inventory information had allowed the brooch to be selected without awareness of its disputed history. No documentation has been supplied to establish that such an administrative mistake occurred. Still, the possibility introduces a different interpretation of Camilla's role. If the item was chosen by a styling team from an inaccurate database, the Queen may not have understood its sensitivity. What appeared to Earl Spencer as a deliberate violation could have been an institutional error. That would not remove the emotional harm, but it would change the moral character of the confrontation. An accidental choice could nevertheless prove highly damaging. The monarchy presents itself as the guardian of history, inheritance, and ceremonial meaning. A failure to identify the background of an object associated with Diana would suggest that its own systems were unable to manage one of its most sensitive legacies. The consequences would reach beyond Camilla. Staff responsible for royal collections, legal advisors overseeing private property, and courtiers planning public appearances could all face scrutiny. If ownership were unclear, the palace might need to determine whether the item belonged to the crown, Diana's estate, the Spencer family, or her descendants. Each possibility would create a different legal and symbolic outcome. William's position would be unusually complex. As Diana's eldest son, he has a personal interest in how her possessions are treated. As heir to the throne, he also has a duty to protect the royal household from legal and reputational damage. Supporting the palace automatically could appear disloyal to his mother's family. Supporting the Spencers without examining the evidence could weaken his father's authority. The alleged request for a united appearance, therefore, asked William to make a public choice before the private facts were settled. The account also raises the possibility of an earlier understanding between the Prince of Wales and his mother's relatives concerning sentimental objects connected to Diana. No verified evidence of such an agreement has been provided, and any claim of a secret pact must remain speculation. However, if William believed assurances had already been given, the brooch's appearance would represent not only a wardrobe error but a failure of trust. That failure could have occurred without Camilla's knowledge. Poor communication between households, incomplete legal records, or the assumption that an item held in palace storage was automatically available could all explain it. But institutions are judged not only by intention, but by whether their systems prevent foreseeable harm. Meanwhile, the question of how Earl Spencer learned about the event would continue to concern the palace. If he received advance information from someone inside the royal operation, the security implications would be serious. Yet the motive would remain uncertain. A staff member might have acted from loyalty to Diana's memory, concern about provenance, or a desire to provoke conflict. Each explanation points toward a different crisis. One suggests a moral objection within the household. Another suggests administrative alarm. The most troubling possibility suggests deliberate destabilization. For Charles, the situation would be expanding on several fronts. A wife reportedly humiliated before guests, a son unwilling to offer immediate public reassurance, a former brother-in-law prepared to challenge palace authority, and a possible leak exposing weaknesses within the royal system. Any response aimed at solving one problem could intensify another. A forceful defense of Camilla might drive William closer to the Spencer position. An apology could look like an admission before ownership was established. Silence might preserve legal caution while allowing speculation to grow. That is why the dispute, if it occurred, could not remain a simple matter of family emotion. It had become a test of how the monarchy handles competing forms of loyalty when history, property, and succession collide. But the most sensitive development was still ahead. Once lawyers began examining the object's status, the question was no longer merely whether Camilla should have worn it. It was whether William would allow the crown to fight Diana's family over a symbol of her legacy, and what his answer would reveal about where his deepest allegiance now lay. William's answer, according to the circulating account, was not delivered through a public speech or a dramatic confrontation. It emerged through legal distance. The Prince of Wales was said to have refused any use of his own office or resources in a dispute that could place Diana's family against the crown. Buckingham Palace has not confirmed that such instructions were issued, and no authenticated memorandum has been released, but the choice described in the story would carry considerable weight. By declining to support a palace challenge, William would not necessarily be ruling against his father. He would be defining the limits of his involvement. The future king could recognize Charles's authority while refusing to help transform a sensitive family inheritance issue into a prolonged institutional battle. That distinction reveals a deeper shift in how William may be preparing to exercise power. Rather than treating loyalty as automatic agreement, he appears in the account to separate loyalty to the monarch from loyalty to every decision made around the monarchy. Such independence can create tension, but it may also be essential for an heir expected to inherit unresolved problems from the present reign. The legal question surrounding the alleged brooch would intensify that pressure. According to the reference narrative, representatives connected to the Spencer estate prepared formal demands concerning the item's ownership and future custody. Those claims remain unverified, and the specific laws and agreements mentioned in the account have not been independently established here. Yet the larger strategic dilemma is clear. If palace lawyers resisted the Spencer position, the dispute could move into public view, inviting scrutiny of private collections, inheritance arrangements, and the handling of Diana's personal possessions. If the crown surrendered too quickly, it might appear to accept wrongdoing before the factual record had been fully examined. William's refusal to join a legal defense could therefore alter the balance before any courtroom became involved. As Diana's son, he would possess emotional and symbolic authority that no palace solicitor could replicate. A legal case pursued without his support might appear institutionally possible, but morally fragile. The public could reasonably ask why the monarchy was fighting to retain an object associated with his mother when her eldest child was unwilling to defend that position. Was William remaining neutral, or was neutrality itself becoming a quiet decision in favor of the Spencers? That ambiguity would place Charles under growing pressure. The king's advisors might recommend defending the royal collection as a matter of precedent. His family instincts could favor avoiding another public conflict surrounding Diana. His concern for Camilla would require ensuring that she was not portrayed as intentionally taking possession of something that may have reached her through administrative error. Every available course would expose a different vulnerability. The reference account suggests Charles eventually chose containment rather than confrontation, authorizing the disputed item to be removed from active royal use while its status was reconsidered. This has not been publicly confirmed, but such an approach would allow the palace to reduce immediate tension without admitting deliberate wrongdoing. It would also reveal the practical limit of royal authority. The sovereign may possess enormous symbolic power, yet private trusts, family estates, inheritance agreements, and public opinion can all restrict what the modern crown is able to claim without consequence. Earl Spencer's alleged strategy would depend upon that reality. By treating the brooch as a matter of legal stewardship rather than only emotional memory, he could challenge the palace on ground where sentiment and documentation overlap. He would no longer be merely Diana's grieving brother confronting Camilla. He would become a trustee insisting that the monarchy respect boundaries supposedly established around his family's property. That transformation matters because institutions are far more comfortable answering emotion with silence than answering legal demands with records. The conflict could also reshape Camilla's public position. If the alleged use of the brooch resulted from a staff error, withdrawing it would be an understandable act of caution. But audiences might interpret the decision more severely, particularly if it followed a direct challenge from the Spencer family and a refusal by William to defend the palace. The Queen would then face a problem that could not be solved through explanation alone. Continuing to wear historic pieces linked to contested family histories might create further controversy. Avoiding them entirely could suggest that invisible restrictions now surrounded her royal presentation. In that sense, the dispute would extend beyond one jewel into the symbolism of Camilla's position. She may hold the title of queen, but not every part of royal history becomes hers to represent simply because she stands beside the king. William's approach, if accurately reported, would suggest he understood that distinction. He could respect Camilla's constitutional place while protecting certain aspects of Diana's memory from being absorbed into the visual language of the current reign. That balancing act may define much of his future leadership. The Prince of Wales cannot rewrite his parents' history, nor can he build a stable monarchy by reopening every old conflict. But he can influence how objects, memories, and family relationships are handled from this point forward. The account further suggests that the dispute affected how royal appearances were planned, with greater separation reportedly introduced between William and Camilla for a period of time. No verified diary changes have been provided to support that claim. Still, temporary distance would make strategic sense if palace officials feared that every shared appearance might be analyzed for evidence of hostility or forced reconciliation. Physical separation can quiet immediate speculation, but it can also make division more visible. When senior royals stop appearing together, absence begins to communicate its own message. That is why the larger consequences would reach beyond the people in the room. Courtiers would observe whose advice prevailed. Legal teams would note whether William's refusal changed the king's course. The Spencer family would understand that Diana's eldest son was unwilling to oppose them publicly. Camilla's household might recognize that certain boundaries around the late princess's legacy could not be crossed without resistance. The pieces were beginning to connect: the alleged confrontation, William's withdrawal, the legal uncertainty, and the heir's refusal to support a palace battle. Together, they suggested that the future king was no longer simply enduring the unresolved history surrounding Diana. He was beginning to determine how that history would be governed. But even this did not reveal the most important turning point, because the decisive question was not whether the brooch would leave the royal collection. It was where it might go next, and whether William could transform an object of family conflict into a symbol of continuity for Diana's descendants. The reported answer was neither the crown's vault nor the Spencer estate's private collection. According to the circulating account, William began exploring a third possibility, placing the disputed brooch beyond the immediate conflict and preserving it for Princess Charlotte, his daughter and Diana's granddaughter. Buckingham Palace has not confirmed such an arrangement, and no authenticated trust document has been released, but the idea would have changed the direction of the entire dispute. Instead of allowing the object to remain a symbol of tension between Camilla and the Spencer family, William could transform it into a direct link between Diana and a younger generation. That would satisfy neither side completely in the short term, yet it might protect the one principle both families could publicly claim to support: keeping an emotionally significant inheritance within Diana's biological line. The reference narrative alleges that William met Earl Spencer privately, without the visible machinery of the royal household surrounding them. That meeting remains unverified, but its reported form matters. By approaching his uncle as Diana's son rather than as the formal representative of the crown, William would be separating a family legacy from the institutional dispute that had grown around it. Such a decision would also reveal a strategic instinct. A legal battle could establish ownership, but it could not repair trust. Court proceedings would expose private documents, revive painful questions about Diana's possessions, and force Charles, Camilla, William, and the Spencers into opposing public positions. A private inheritance arrangement could achieve what palace lawyers might struggle to deliver, a result in which no one was required to declare victory. But why Charlotte? As William's daughter, she represents continuity without carrying the immediate burden of succession that rests upon Prince George. An heirloom passed to her could remain connected to the future monarchy while avoiding absorption into the general royal collection. It would also allow the object to be understood primarily as a family possession rather than a symbol of rank. If the reported plan is accurate, the choice would carry emotional meaning for William. He could protect something associated with his mother without using it to challenge his father's reign. He could acknowledge the Spencer family's concerns without placing Diana's legacy entirely outside the royal future. And he could ensure that the disputed item eventually belonged to someone who knew Diana not through memory, but through the stories inherited from her children. Yet the proposal would create immediate pressure inside the palace. For Camilla, the removal of the brooch from royal use could appear publicly as a concession, even if she had worn it without understanding its alleged history. Her advisors would need to prevent caution from being interpreted as guilt. Continuing to explain the matter might prolong the controversy, while silence could allow critics to assign motives that had never been established. The account suggests that other historically sensitive pieces were subsequently reconsidered within Camilla's wardrobe. No verified evidence has been provided to confirm such a review. However, palace stylists would have an obvious reason to proceed carefully. Once one object becomes the center of a family dispute, every future jewel is examined not only for beauty and value, but for ownership, provenance, and emotional association. Charles would face a different consequence. Agreeing to transfer the item away from the crown could prevent a damaging confrontation, but it might also signal that William's preferred solution had prevailed. The king would remain the final authority, yet the heir would have shaped the outcome by refusing to support a legal defense and offering an alternative capable of protecting the monarchy's reputation. Was this a son helping his father escape an impossible dispute, or a future sovereign quietly establishing that certain decisions involving Diana would now pass through him? That question would not remain confined to the family. Palace officials would recognize the precedent. William was not simply reacting emotionally to his mother's memory. He was potentially creating a framework for how contested legacies should be handled. Separate private inheritance from crown property. Avoid unnecessary litigation. preserve historical meaning without allowing it to destabilize the present reign. The public response, if the arrangement became known, would probably divide along familiar lines. Some might see Charlotte's proposed inheritance as a compassionate solution that restored dignity to an object drawn into controversy. Others could question whether a young princess should become the symbolic answer to a dispute created by adults long before she was born. There would also be concern about the burden placed upon her. Diana's jewelry is never viewed as decoration alone. Each piece carries memory, public expectation, and comparison. Passing such an object to Charlotte could honor her grandmother, but it could also place another generation beneath the emotional weight of a story it did not create. William would understand that danger better than most. His own life has been shaped by the public's desire to find Diana in his expressions, choices, and style of leadership. Protecting Charlotte's inheritance would therefore require protecting her freedom to decide whether, when, and how the object should ever be worn. This is where the alleged solution becomes more than family diplomacy. It raises a larger question about who will control the symbols of the monarchy in the next reign. The present court has often relied upon inherited traditions without fully resolving the personal histories attached to them. William's reported approach suggests a more deliberate separation between institutional assets and emotionally sensitive family possessions. If that philosophy guides his future court, it could influence far more than jewelry. Private correspondence, photographs, residences, charitable patronages, and ceremonial objects may all require clearer boundaries as the monarchy moves from Charles's reign toward William's. But the reported arrangement would not erase what happened inside the family. Earl Spencer's alleged intervention had exposed continuing distrust. Camilla's association with the brooch had reopened questions about Diana's place within the current royal image. Charles had been forced to balance his wife's dignity against his son's emotional and institutional concerns. And William, whatever the truth of the most dramatic claims, had once again been placed between two versions of loyalty. The strongest turning point was therefore not simply the suggestion that Charlotte might inherit the brooch. It was the possibility that William had found a way to take an object that divided the present royal family and place its meaning in the hands of the future. Yet even that solution leaves one final question unresolved. Was this an act of healing that protected everyone involved, or evidence that Diana's legacy remains so powerful that the modern monarchy must continually reorganize itself around her memory? Because the answer may reveal not only what kind of father William is, but what kind of king he is preparing to become. That question reaches the heart of William's position because healing and influence are not opposites. By protecting an object associated with Diana while keeping it connected to the royal future, the Prince of Wales would be doing more than settling a family disagreement. He would be demonstrating how memory might be managed differently when he eventually becomes king. The reported arrangement involving Princess Charlotte has not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, or the Spencer family. Nor has any independently authenticated evidence established that the confrontation, legal demands, or inheritance agreement occurred as described. Those limitations remain essential. Yet the story resonates because it reflects a genuine challenge facing the House of Windsor. How can the monarchy honor Diana without allowing every reference to her life to reopen the wounds of the past? William cannot answer that question by removing his mother from the royal story. Diana's influence is already visible in the emotional language of his public service, his concern for family stability, and the way audiences understand his future leadership. At the same time, he cannot allow her memory to become a permanent weapon against Charles or Camilla because a monarchy governed entirely by unresolved history would struggle to move forward. The solution described in the circulating account offers a symbolic middle path. An heirloom preserved for Charlotte would remain within Diana's family line without being used to diminish the current queen. It would acknowledge the Spencer connection while ensuring that the object could one day return to public royal life through Diana's granddaughter, not through a dispute over ownership or status. That possibility also reveals something important about succession. The future of the monarchy will not be shaped only by constitutional responsibilities or official ceremonies. It will be shaped by how William handles the emotional inheritance passed down through his family, its grief, rivalries, symbols, and unfinished conversations. For Charles, the long-term meaning would be equally complex. Allowing a contested item to leave royal control might appear to weaken the authority of his household, yet it could also demonstrate restraint. A king does not protect the crown by winning every private argument. Sometimes stability requires recognizing when the cost of resistance is greater than the value of the object being defended. Camilla's legacy would depend upon how the episode was interpreted. If she wore the alleged brooch without understanding its sensitivity, then she too would have been caught within a failure of palace administration. Withdrawing from the dispute would not necessarily represent defeat. It could be understood as an acceptance that some symbols remain inseparable from Diana and cannot be absorbed comfortably into the image of the present reign. Earl Spencer's position presents another contradiction. His determination to defend his sister's legacy may be viewed as loyalty, but public confrontation can also place Diana's sons back inside conflicts they have spent decades trying to manage. Protecting memory requires more than resistance. It requires judgment about when exposure serves the family and when it merely recreates old pain. That may be why William's reported role matters most. He stands between the Spencer family and the crown, but he also belongs to both histories. His authority comes not from choosing one side completely, but from finding a future in which Diana's memory is respected without preventing reconciliation. Royal observers may therefore watch what happens to other possessions, patronages, and traditions associated with the late princess. They may also examine whether William continues to treat emotionally sensitive family matters through private negotiation rather than palace confrontation. Such decisions could become early signs of a reign that values clearer boundaries between personal inheritance and institutional property. The competing interpretations will remain. Some may see the entire account as an unverified drama constructed around the enduring fascination with Diana. Others may believe it reflects a deeper truth about the royal family, that beneath ceremony and public unity, the monarchy is still negotiating the meaning of her life and the consequences of her absence. Either way, this story was never simply about a brooch. It was about who owns memory, who protects legacy, and whether the next generation can inherit royal history without also inheriting every conflict attached to it. So what do you think? Was the reported solution an act of thoughtful family healing, or does it suggest that Diana's legacy still holds extraordinary power over the modern monarchy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this full documentary journey through the loyalties, pressures, and hidden dynamics surrounding the House of Windsor, subscribe to the Prime Expedition and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep royal story. Because the most valuable royal inheritance is not always the jewel placed inside a vault, but the wisdom required to decide what it should mean when it finally emerges again.